morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Thoughts from the Crawlspace. Today is all about flippers. You know, renovating a house is big. Any HGTV show you turn on, all kinds of episodes, right? From beachfront to inner city Galveston to wherever, somebody's renovating. And while that's a great thing to restore something that's run down to something new, what we see a lot of as home inspectors is renovations that are done poorly. We call them flippers. Flippers that just go in and basically carpet, paint, and call it good. They buy it low. They make it look a little bit better cosmetically. They're not addressing the major systems of the house. And then we get called in to inspect. And so what we're going to talk about today is several things that we find in home inspections that are pretty common with flippers like this. Now, to be clear, there are some companies out there that do a really good job. They take their time, they care, they want things to be right for whoever buys that house. And so I don't want to throw all flippers in the same bucket, but there are a lot of them out there that I would never buy a house if they did it without getting a home inspection first. So beyond the home inspection, we just want you to be aware of some of the things that these flippers are doing to try to make the house look good, and they're covering it up, or they're just not kind of being detailed enough that they need to be. Now, for the record, I don't think the vast majority of these flippers are being fraudulent in any way. They're not trying to cover things up per se. Just the skill sets of some of them are different than maybe they need to be to get the job done right, okay? So let's jump right into the points. I'm going to go over 10 or 11 of these points to keep an eye on when you're looking at a house that's been recently renovated and go from there. So number one thing we see quite a bit is loose plumbing. And you're going to see this mostly like under sinks, or they install new fixtures in a shower. And so you can reach over and you can move the entire shower handle and shower head assembly. Well, that hasn't been mounted properly in the wall. It hasn't been sealed at the exit point through the shower wall. Those can all lead to leaks. It can put stress on water lines, and it can just lead to a host of problems. Under the sink, you might see drains that leak. You fill up a sink, you drain it, and some water's dripping out of it. Now, most people, when they install new fixtures, they're going to run some water, but they probably won't run it like a typical home inspector would, where you're filling up the sink multiple times, you're draining it, you're seeing if it holds water, you're seeing if it drains well all at once, you're checking for venting, plumbing problems, and things like that. So we're not looking at the shiny new faucet. We're looking to see how it works. We're looking to see if it's installed properly. Is the hot on the left? Is the cold on the right? Do you got good water pressure? And so forth. So loose plumbing or improperly installed plumbing fixtures are a big thing we see on flipping. You know, to be a licensed plumber typically is about a 4-year commitment for education to get your plumbing license. So plumbing's a skill. It's not just anybody can't just go out to the hardware store and buy a faucet or a shower and install it well all the time. So be on the lookout for those kind of things. Number two is in an area where you don't look a lot, and that's in an attic. Blown insulation, blown all over possibly old knob and tube wiring. Knob and tube wiring, in case you're not familiar with that, is an older type of wiring that was installed up until the 30s. And the way it was installed, it was basically you got your neutral wire and your hot wire, and they were installed about 3 inches apart. Nowadays, they're in one bundle together, covered by typically Romex or non-metallic coating. But older knob and tube had kind of a rubber coating, and it cracked, and they had to separate them. And the reason they separate them is for heat dissipation. In other words, so the wires wouldn't get too hot. They could free flow, the heat could free flow away from it. But people unfamiliar with that will come in and see that an attic doesn't have any insulation or very little, and they just blow insulation over the top of knob and tube wiring. Well, what does this do? Obviously, it's going to keep the heat dissipation from occurring, which can lead to fires. Another thing that can happen in blown insulation, you get a lot of mouse nests and rodent nests in it because it's comfortable and it's warm. But that's also down where the wiring is, and they'll chew away on these wires when they're hidden and create problems with that. So that's one thing we're always looking for. You can't always tell if it's completely hidden. We're not going to go burrowing through the insulation to try to find that. But that is one area that definitely needs to be looked at when you're buying a house. And that could be for any kind. That could just be a homeowner that improved their insulation. So make sure that's been done professionally and properly. Another thing right along with that in attics is the waste left behind by animals. Mice, bats, raccoons, squirrels, whatever you might see up there, that waste is potentially toxic. We always put a statement in our reports that any type of this waste has potentially harmful ramifications for anybody that breathes it in. So if that is left behind by a flipper or a renovator, however you want to term the person that did the work, that is a red flag and something that really should be addressed by a pest control company. In rare occasions, if the contamination is too severe, the only recourse is to remove all the insulation, clean everything out, and start over. And that's expensive. So that's probably third on our list of things we see with these kind of renovations is either with regard to number 2, insulation over the wiring, or just contaminated insulation. So while we're up in the attic, another point we see up there, I guess this will be number 4 on our list, is just poor structural repairs. You'll look outside along a roof line or the plane of the roof and you'll see it all wavy. And you get in the attic and you've had lumber that's been spliced together, braced here and there. The braces probably don't go to where they should go. In other words, they don't go they're not transferring the load from the attic down to a bearing wall or to an outside wall and the footer. They're just going maybe to a ceiling joist. So that's putting extra pressure on the ceiling, and it's just creating an uneven appearance in the attic on the framing. So framing done by somebody that's not experienced in framing is not a good way to go. And that's where, maybe this flipper has a skill set in drywalling or electrical or something, but they're trying to do all the work themselves. And so one aspect of it seems like there's always going to be a problem with it. So really look, framing in the attic, that's an area that frequently has to be repaired over time. If you buy a house that's 100 years old, chances are something's sagging or missing or cut or deteriorated. All right, number 5, and this is a big one, incorrect installation of vented appliances. And I'm thinking more of modern type appliances like a water heater, maybe a tankless water heater. A lot of these tankless water heaters come and there's specific instructions on them from the manufacturer on how this should be vented. And honestly, in a home inspector, we're paid to know the basics of this stuff, but some of the specifics you're only going to know by looking up the manufacturer and finding out the way to do this. And so sometimes that can be hard to find. And if you potentially vent a water heater incorrectly, it may not work. It may cause a health problem in the home because of backdrafting or incomplete exhaust or incomplete combustion. And a repair for something like this could be a couple $1,000 depending on the scenario. So really make sure if you're buying a house that's been recently renovated, you want to make sure if they have new appliances that the venting on those has been done properly, because that can potentially be a life-altering event if not. Number 6, and this expense-wise is probably one of the bigger ones, and that's roof installation. We see a lot of new roofs on houses, and that way the flipper can advertise, hey, you have new appliances, new roof, and you think, oh, the big stuff's covered. I don't even need to get an inspection. But what you may not realize is that just putting shingles on a roof, or even if it's metal, doesn't mean it's been done correctly. And in some cases, it can make the situation worse. Many times a roofer doesn't remove the shingles underneath, and they just put a layer right on top. And while that might be legal, that doesn't mean that's the best thing for the roof. And so we see a lot of things like improperly nailed shingles, or loose shingles, or crooked shingles, or torn, missing even on some newer ones if they didn't get sealed down properly. The flashing, where the plumbing vent comes through the roof, the flashing around it is frequently not done properly. It's put on by someone that just doesn't have the knowledge they need to do a proper job. And so that's another aspect that on the roof, besides just the shingles, that needs attention, because the flashing, honestly, that's frequently where the rain comes in, or the water comes in, snow melt, whatever it may be. So definitely something you want to get checked out by an inspector or at a professional roofer at the very least, to make sure that it's been put on properly and that they haven't taken any shortcuts. They haven't used less nails than they should have per manufacturer recommendations. Because what can happen is you buy that house and you have an issue with the roof and you turn it into your insurance company, and they're going to come out and see how it's been installed. They're going to deny your claim. They may even cancel your insurance at that point. So make sure your roof's been installed properly, and it's up to modern standards of how that should be done. Number 7, and this might be something a little gray area, but they paint everything. All right, they're going to go in there, basically take a 5-gallon bucket of white paint and a sprayer and just spray everything. They spray wires, they spray gas lines, they spray water lines, drain lines. They spray everything that isn't white. All right, and this could be in a basement. It could be on the main level. And so that makes inspecting difficult. You don't know exactly what's this line, what's that line. It's hard to follow them. It's hard to see. Sometimes they've painted over rust. They've painted over corrosion. They've painted over things that need replaced. And instead of replacing them, just paint them. Make them look great, right? And so be leery of a house that has not taken the time to paint properly. You've seen those houses. You go in there and they've painted the outlets, they've painted the switches, they've painted some of the light fixtures, and maybe even the electrical panel, just painted right over it. And so those are things that are telltale sign to me of a flipper that doesn't really care about, one, the aesthetics of the place, or two, doing things the right way. If we see a house that has paint in this way, we're going to be very leery of what else we might see on that house. If we're going to have suspicions probably as soon as we pull up. If and this is another point, siding. If the siding is nailed too tightly, if it's fallen off, if it's broken everywhere, if it's crooked, well, that tells me a professional didn't do the job on this. So if that doesn't give us a clue, certainly something like painting everything in sight will give us a clue. Certainly you want paint freshened up on a renovation, and we're not putting all painting down, but it's when it's used as a cover-up that it's a problem. Here's a big one. Number 8, 3-hole receptacles on ungrounded wiring. So a renovator may buy a house that has ungrounded wiring left over from the 40s and 50s. And instead of rewiring the house, they're going to replace the old 2-hole receptacles with a 3-hole receptacle. Now, a 3-hole receptacle is significantly different in that the bottom hole is for the grounding wire. And this takes basically any charge or electric shock to ground and creates a safer plug for appliances and people, to be blunt. And so what happens many times is someone will come in and just replace the receptacles and not replace the wiring. And so you see this 3-hole receptacle and you think it's grounded. You think it's okay to plug your new 77-inch OLED TV into it and that everything's grounded and fine, or your computer or whatever. But you find out too late that it's not grounded. It still uses the old wires that don't even have a ground wire with them. And so that is a big thing we see on flip jobs where they haven't taken the time to do things right. Now, if we would go into that same house and see brand new outlets with 2 holes, that would be done correctly. You're not required to replace all the wiring in a house when you renovate. But per electrical codes, that's considered okay. Per electrical codes, you want that 2-hole receptacle to be with wiring that's ungrounded, and that's considered okay. But it's when they put the 3-hole with the older wiring that's not okay. So that's something we see very, very often in a house. So staying in the electrical mode, 9, another thing we see is unlabeled electrical panels. Again, this flipper might have changed all the receptacles. They might even put in a new panel, but they didn't label it. All right? And so if it's not labeled, you don't know what goes to where. You don't know what to turn off if you need to kill the power to a circuit. And so that's a fairly simple fix most of the time. An electrician can come in and use their equipment and find a way to label the circuits and get that taken care of. Number 10, mold. Mold everywhere. You know, most people can tell if something looks like mold, but a lot of people don't feel qualified to comment on it, or maybe they shouldn't, or maybe they just ignore it. Especially if they buy a house with a crawl space or an attic that's hard to get into, they don't really care what's down there. They want to paint it, they want to carpet it, they want to get out, all right? And so we frequently find these beautiful houses, even if it's been renovated well. You go in the crawl space, and because they didn't address the ventilation or the moisture entry, we have all kinds of mold in the crawl space. And so that's something you won't know unless you go look. You know, is it getting in the house? Maybe. We need a test to make sure of that. But certainly you want the spaces where folks don't go, or areas where there's been a water event in the past to be tested or checked for mold. Another one that's a problem, number 11 on the list, this is more of a general one, but they just treat the symptoms. In other words, okay, maybe they did see the mold in a crawl space. So they might even take the step to have it professionally remediated or cleaned. They put down a vapor barrier. But have they really addressed what's causing that mold? Are they just treating the symptoms and not the cause? Is the grading around the property proper? Is it sloping toward the foundation and allowing water to pool or run in a crawl space vent because the grading's too close to the vent? And so in other words, we're going to point out on an inspection what the problem is and not just the symptom. So you want to make sure that whoever renovated this house has actually done what they need to do to take care of the problem. Did they also, besides just treat the mold, did they also improve the drainage? Did they regrade the property if needed? If they had electrical problems, did they actually rewire the house instead of just patch it, splice it, put in a new outlet? So that's what we're looking for on an inspection. And then another thing that we see staying in a crawl space is just simply poor crawl space repair. This is something where you walk in a house and the floor slopes, or it's uneven, or doors don't close properly. They hit on the frame. They might not close at all. What's the cause of that? Well, we don't know. You get down in the crawl space and you see that they've stacked, a piece of wood on a rock with a brick, and then crammed a shim of some kind under it to, quote, shore up the crawl space. And thinking nobody will ever go down there, nobody will ever know. Well, that's a temporary repair at best, and it's something that we need to make sure that your supports for the crawl space would be on concrete, and they're going to be there for the long term, and they're going to support that structure. We understand as home inspectors, you're not going to fix all the scars on an old house that has had sagging, that has had, problems over the years with rot or whatever. You're not going to make a house perfectly level that isn't without massive, expense. And we don't expect that. But what we want to do, this is your investment. We don't want it to get any worse. We want the natural rise in the market to affect your house as well. And if you have foundation problems that are ongoing, that's going to really hurt that part of the equation. So I guess to summarize, I could go on and on. Some of you listeners out there probably have things you've seen on flip houses as well that you've run into. There's almost an endless list of things we could find that we see on these. These are some of the more common. These are some of the more expensive ones we see more. If your roof's put on incorrectly, there's only one remedy. Take it off and start over, right? If you have crawl spaces that are improperly supported, that can be fixed. Maybe not easily. It depends how much room's down there. How do you get down there? Can you get the right size materials down there that you need, and so forth? But we just want you to be sure to have a few points to go by if you're looking at a house to buy, or if you and your real estate agent are out there looking at houses. Just some things to look at real quickly. Still recommend a complete home inspection because I've only scratched the surface of what we could find on a house like that. But we're in the business of protecting you. We want to protect your family. We want you to buy something that's a good investment. And some of these things are easier to fix than others. Some of them are just annoyances, but some of them can have a major impact on your budget. And if you're not prepared for that going in, it can really affect your financial outlook for the near future. So thanks for listening. Let us know. Share this episode. Let us know if there's anything else we can add to the list or something you've seen. And we would love to hear about it and bring it up on a future episode. So thanks again for listening. Have a great day, everybody.